What are some of the scariest small towns in America? Colorado City. AZ. If you are not known there, you will be followed by several white SUVs. Cairo, Illinois. Protected by levees. Mostly abandoned. What is it? Would you say? You actually do here? Carpenter, WY. It's a super tiny town. I've only driven through once, so I can't say it's super scary. Definitely creepy though. The one time I was there was nobody outside except this little girl outside the town hall that just stared at us while we drove by, shaking her head the whole time. On the way out of town we did see a kid playing basketball in his backyard, so that mitigated the creepiness of the little girl. Rulo, Nebraska. The town has a real haunted vibe to it. Lots of abandoned buildings with no one around. Plus it was home to a Christian identity cult led by Michael Ryan in the early 1980s that tortured and murdered several members. Ryan was sentenced to death for the murders but ended up dying in prison before the sentence was carried out. Rod Colvin wrote a book about this cult called Evil Harvest. Newtown, MO. Part of St. Charles, I'm pretty sure. Place is eerie. The trees line up too perfectly. No noise. No dogs barking. No kids playing. Nobody just waking around. The houses are all less than 10 years old but nearly identical and made to look like 1910s 20s bungalows. Landscaping is pristine. Then downtown there are frickin' massive animal statues and the buildings all look like the Parthenon. It feels like those videos demonstrating the effects of a nuke. If a place could feel like that. My GPS rerouted me through Gary, Indiana last week. There was a little car fire in a neighborhood it routed me through. Seemed to have been burning for a while. No one around. Yeah dude. I drive through Gary when I make the road trip home. Every time. I gas up in eastern Indiana and I don't fkin stop until I hit Wisconsin. I understand that Gary, Indiana, is perhaps not as bad as the online reputation may have you believe. But I've been wrong before. Samoa, California. I've been in some weird places. Nowhere has ever creeped me out like that little village of the damned. Imagine Stephen King and David Lynch fell asleep playing Silent Hill and shared a fever dream directed by John Carpenter. Anyone who's been there feel free to back me up. There's a straight up evil energy there. Don't think this particularly counts because it wasn't actually a town or even in a town. But I got lost not too far outside Hot Springs, Arkansas and stumbled across a weird church that had a razor wire fence and was almost nothing but concrete bunker styled buildings. Also, if you aren't white, avoid Arl, Missouri. Onion Town. Just gonna throw it out there for any of you idiots from Arlington or Millbrook who might go down a rabbit hole. IDK, if Onion Town is still a thing the kids talk about. It is real and they seriously do not want you to come check it out. Seriously, in my case included a cinder block thrown at my car and multiple people standing armed in their lawns. Most stories I've heard are far more innocent than this. IDK, if something had them in a tizzy that day or it's because I rolled up with some black people in the car but I've never floored it in reverse before or after that day. Also, the person you just met from Dover probably is sick of being asked about it. If the Google Street View car said no thanks, then so should you. Hawthorne, Nevada was a very strange place. It has a naval base in the middle of the desert and a lake called Walker Lake that's rumored to have a tunnel for subs to go to the Pacific. Orangeburg. SC had to spend a week there for work once. From the moment I arrived, I felt uneasy. The town was eerily quiet when I drove in. I felt like I was in a post-apocalyptic movie of some sort. I'm a pretty happy guy and I loved my job, but I felt depressed all week and don't think I smiled once while I was there. Not one person I worked with that week seemed happy either. The hotel I stayed at gave me the creeps. There was quite a bit of drug activity going on in the parking lot which made the situation worse. I had to move to another hotel in the middle of the night because I didn't feel safe. A week went by so slow. On my departure day, I woke up early and booked a TF out of there. Once I was on the highway headed to the airport. I felt such relief. Cairo, Illinois. Drove through a few times with my boyfriend when he was a truck driver. Had a very spooky and dark feeling to it. Only place open was a Subway. And all the lights in the parking lot were out. I looked the town up and apparently a flood had come through and destroyed most of the town years before. What was left was probably the most unwelcome, eerie place I've had the dissatisfaction of visiting. Bardstown. KY. It's just Gibsonton. FL. The rules are different there. Skidmore. MO. The whole town cowered down to a bully, Ken McElroy, for years as he stole, raped, and intimidated the residents. Then one day they had enough and gunned him down outside the local bar. I visited the town several years later while in the area on business and I got the weirdest vibe from the townsfolk. Perhaps it was because I was an outsider and they were probably sick of the notoriety and unwanted attention. Whatever it was, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Cassadaga, Florida. You won't stumble into by accident. It's about 45 minutes northeast of Orlando. Town full of psychics and various other mediums. And the Cassadaga spiritualist camp. I assume during whatever its peak season might be it's a fairly busy tourist trap. But I've been there twice and the place was basically a ghost town. Real weird vibe. Xenia. Mum and dad robbed a pharmacy there in the 70s. Used to work in Xenia. Can confirm it is the worst. I felt like once I drove out of it into another city I could fully relax and take a breath. Warren, Massachusetts. Just an eerie town with a weird past. People from there tend to be odd. Hillsville. PA aka Zombieland. Some crazy local legends brewed up about that place over the years. Involving lighting a torch in the woods to begin your journey. A haunted bridge. Graveyard and murder house. Was really fun to go there back in high school. There's a really creepy underpass decorated in hundreds of statues of Mother Mary before going up what seems a 90-degree incline to actually get up into the hills. Stull. KS. Gateway to Hell. Orange, Texas. A small town on the Louisiana border off of I-10. The town had very productive shipyards in World War I era and it was a booming town at one point. But time, drugs and generational poverty have poisoned the area. It has a suspended out of time feel about it. Season 1 of True Detective was filmed in the area. Trona. CA. I drove through at night on the way to Death Valley. It's a pretty small town from what I could tell but had some kind of huge factory with all kinds of lights. We got a bad vibe but needed to stop and pump our gas anyway. While pumping the gas, we saw a woman clearly smoking meth and then walking holding garbage bags. Somehow, when we looked up next she was hitting the garbage bags with a golf club and snarling some methed up words we couldn't understand at them. I noticed that she was wearing a shirt of a gas station employee and that nobody else was around at all. We got out of there. Lots of strangeness in the desert. If you've ever heard musings about Onion Town NY and assume it would be worth checking it or it can't possibly be real, I can assure you the answers are, respectively, it isn't and it is. I was a moron teenager who went poking around with my fellow moron teenager friends. You don't want to be there and they emphatically do not want you there either. How about a creepy small town in Canada? I grew up about 20 minutes down the road from Aylmer, Ontario. The town is run by a legit cult. Fundamentalist Christianity. Bunch of people following an old man. Very conservative town. They've been doing fairly big anti-mask protests. And causing a lot of BS lately. Lots of allegations of sex abuse. And everything else that comes along with your typical cult. Growing up in another weird town. Aylmer was just different. Taos, New Mexico. Nothing creepy about it at first glance. But the entire town is permeated with an odd buzzing noise not unlike a refrigerator. Even weirder scientists have no idea where it comes from. Viber. Came to say this. Awful. Awful town. My mom has family from there. Went once. Never went back. Bunch of f***ing racists. I think there are many little towns in the deep south that are straight out of a horror movie. Centralia, PA. I've been through there, it's effing desolate and there's smoke coming out of the streets. Is this the town that's on fire underground? Cooperstown. NY is a really charming town. But there is something incredibly eerie about it. It feels like it is frozen in time and several locations make you feel like you were somehow transported decades into the past. Think Field of Dreams when he visits Dr. Graham. Apparently there are several haunted spots. I drove in at night and the road leading into the town twists through a dense, poorly lit wooded area. I was waiting for a masked guy with a chainsaw to jump into the road at any second. There are also more bed and breakfasts rather than hotels, and I stayed in this really old house with tons of creepy dolls and Victorian furniture. Thankfully the owners were incredibly friendly. Anyway, really nice town with good food and I'd love to go back. But damn is it creepy. Point Pleasant, right? The most famous creepy small town. The Mothman? As a West Virginian, I can assure you that Point Pleasant is more boring and sad than creepy. Trust me. There's a little town in Florida called Denellen. It's where Jeepers Creepers was filmed. Townsend, Savannah, Georgia. It's claimed to be the most haunted place in the world. I definitely wanna grab my ectoplasma gun and ghost trap and call in the guys to check it out sometime. I lived there for a number of years and weird creepy bizarre shit happens there too. And tons of racist shit. It is a beautiful town though. West Memphis. Yes. All the pleasures of Memphis. But in Arkansas. The Salton Sea. Nearer. Iowa. Dawson. Nebraska. An accident forced us off the highway between Casey and Omaha. Drove through this tiny town, which appears almost completely abandoned, and immediately seeing giant black spray painted letters on the side of a dilapidated brick building. It's coming. When I noticed the Confederate flag in the window of a trailer across the street, it was time to gtfo. This town isn't as scary or interesting as some of the others, but I still want to know. Dawson. What exactly is coming? Skidmore. Mo. Everything I've read about that place just sounds so sinister. West Virginia. All of it. Any of it. I'd rather be back in Afghanistan. I'd heard jokes about West Virginia my entire life. Moved to the East Coast. And traveled through WV. Stopped at a pretty big gas station. Right off the interstate. While I was waiting in line. The most stereotypical redneck imaginable leaned in behind me. Stroked and sniffed my hair. And said, "You smell purty." I don't want to judge an entire state based off of that experience. But FFS. That happened 2 minutes into me being out of my car in that state. It didn't help the stereotype. Hope County. Montana. Apparently some guy created a doomsday cult where they forcibly drugged, kidnapped and killed people who didn't see the light. Pawhuska. Oklahoma. Decaying oil boom town stolen from the Osage. I'm pretty sure it's where some of the Osage Indian murders took place. It's a weird little place with lots of history and a strange population of uber rich Palm Beachers that vacation there. The downtown is frozen in time Art Deco architecture while the rest of the town looks like a bomb was dropped in the neighborhoods. Seriously. The neighborhood houses look like they exploded. There's something just off there. It's like the air is electric and the atmosphere is open at the same time. It's like the feeling before an electrical storm no matter the weather. Buzzing. Maybe the veil is just in there? Maybe it's all the pain. The rise and fall of oil. Extreme generational violence against the Osage. The poverty. The income divide. And the struggle of the cowboy. I'm high and tired so I'll end there. I'm pretty down on Paris. Texas. Wikipedia pages. Yikes on bikes. Boswell. Oklahoma is also not fun. Hahaha, I just googled it and it has an Eiffel Tower with a cowboy hat. Harrison, Arkansas. Went to visit my SOS family there a few years back. Nope, the FCK out of there as soon as I saw the KKK billboards. Another interesting thing about this spot, it was a dry county until 2012. They only had one bar in town for a while and it was at the very mouth of the main bike path and Bible Belt. So you had a bunch of racist biker gangs who dressed up for church on Sunday and racked up $100 tabs at the bar on Bud Light and liquid marijuana shots. I took a weekend trip there without knowing what I was getting into, thanks Gruppen, and it was an interesting and hopefully never repeated experience. Homeland Park. SC. It's more of a community outside a small city. But FCK, that place is horrible. Camden. NJ. It's probably more of a small city. Very high violence rate. I grew up near there. My father grew up there. And I can tell you where to buy drugs. Where you don't want to be at sometimes. And where most of the cops are. Not idyllic. Stockton. Car. I don't really need to say more. But if you need a reason. The birthplace of the mass schoolyard shooting plus lots more. Bucksport. Maine. It even has an actual cursed gravestone with an imprint of a foot. My hometown. Won't say its name. But there is a street named Hannibal in the square. Our nearest hospital has a horrible patient recovery rate and has nearly killed some of my family. People following you home is common in the most well lit and populated areas. And I know of at least 3 murder cases in my neighborhood alone. Used to joke with my friends that we lived in a backwater horror movie location. Gary. Indiana. I was flying to Chicago and the rest of my family was driving there from the East Coast. I always turn on my phone after a flight to a few texts from my parents asking about airport logistics, but this time I picked up my phone and the only text I saw was, "We're stopping for gas in a town called Gary. Looks a little run down." And no other texts besides that. No one in my family would pick up for a phone call and they were usually early to the airport. My imagination went running due to the reputation that Reddit has given me about Gary. Well. Good to know that I haven't seen Harmony or Canton, Minnesota on here. Colfax. Washington. One road town on the way to a few colleges. Every time I went there the streets and side streets and stores were absent people, the exception being cars leaving or returning to the colleges and cops hiding in speed traps, and every time I went there and stepped outside there was just a swarm of tiny blue flies or gnats or something. Plus on my way home after graduation, with a 5 or 6 hours drive ahead of me, I grabbed some fast food and got the worst food poisoning of my life. That's not the town's fault, but the whole place creeps me out. This will get buried. But outside Philly there is a street known as Midgetville. The houses are tiny and little people used to be the exclusive residents. If you drove down the street back in the day they would pelt your car with rocks. I'm sorry but this sounds funny. Ravenna, Michigan. In the middle of nowhere. Almost 20 minutes from the outside world. There's a lot of strange people there. Including my stepdad. Also, there is almost no house without an unexplained experience. Ghosts, including the one I lived in for almost 10 years. Anna. Illinois. It's an acronym. Ain't no allowed. Fill in the blank yourself. It has a dark history and because of that there's literally no black people living there. Trona. I'm seeing a lot of Indiana here. Jerome in Arizona. A haunted, creepy looking old hotel. The town itself is basically on the very steep side of a mountain. Also in the same town is a 1900 deep mine shaft that you can look down. What? I love Jerome. It's just a hippy dippy little artist community. We ate avocado toast and I bought a print from their art collective a few years ago. They're just high desert odd. Not odd. Chester. Has this gas station that is wallpapered with alt-right propaganda and I have been too scared to go back since. My husband is Asian and I'm petrified something will happen if we stop there again. Any sundown town would be a right answer. Granite Falls, Washington. A ridiculous amount of meth. Inbreeding. Neo-Nazis. A cult. It's got it all. There's a lot of places like that in the PNW, but in my experience Granite Falls is the worst. Finally Washington makes the list. I've only seen the town's name and never knew about the cult. The other stuff does seem pretty standard for a lot of small towns around here, as you say.